Hi everyone, my name is Julie. This is Keep Calm with Books and Coffee. I talk about books on this channel, mainly books about magic, and today we're going to be talking about some of my top buzzwords for books. Hi everyone, so I have had this video as sort of a potential video for a while now. I have wanted to talk about the buzzwords that I have around books, things that I hear in the description, I hear what people talk about, things that I notice time and time again come up in books that I really love, and then I, search them out as well. Things that big or small, in the description or just a tiny footnote, things that I really like in books and things that I want when I'm looking for them. And I've had this kind of coming up for a while, and then I had things written out, and Leandra over at Leandra the TBR0 recently did a video where she talked about things that she's asking the community for, and I want to incorporate that little piece into this video as well, because I've been thinking about the things that I like in books, and I wanted to kind of talk about them and discuss them and put them out in the ether, and Leandra had a great idea of asking for recommendations. So I want to thank her for that idea, but also ask you that if you know books like this out in the world, books that, you think I would like based on these buzzwords, please let me know. So let's jump into what my buzzwords are. And these are mostly things that are within the context of the story. There's a few things that are not quite that, and some of them are really specific and some of them aren't, but let's jump into the first one. So the first one I want to talk about is specific gods or specific magics. So if you have a magic worker who can work with thread or with plants or maybe only a specific type of rock, think of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but I like it even more when we aren't talking about just things like air, water, earth, and fire, but instead we talk about the metal bending that we eventually get to, and like Katara and her things when we talk about blood bending, that type of more specific, the better. I find it so fascinating. And when we have gods of a specific area, a specific thing, I think this was ultimately fostered by Tamora Pierce's books that I read as a kid. Her Tortal series is very much like this, and her Circle of Magic series is very much like this, that we have very specific gods, and then we also have very specific magics. So that was something that I grew up finding interesting, and now as an adult, I just love this. I love seeing it explored. I love seeing the way that it can, go well and go poorly, and have characters that have really useful gifts, but then ones that are also useful in their own way, but maybe not as obviously. So some examples of this in my reading life are God Killer by Hannah Canner. We have really, really specific gods, all the way down to a god of a stream, a god of a brook, and then we have things like our main character Sketty, who is the god of white lies. So you can have a huge range there of gods and goddesses, and it's fascinating to explore. Then we have the Tamora Pierce books, like I mentioned, as well as the Truth Witch series by Susan Dennard. This is a series that talks about very specific magics. Some people are water witches, some people are wind witches. Then we have truth witches, people who can, discern truth from lie with their magic. Then I would also mention things like Small Miracles here, that, we have these specific rules around magic and specific Galadriel is the angel of petty temptation, or the demon of petty temptation, just little things like that. So it can be a essential part of the story, or it can be a footnote, but I just love it. I love it when we have these very specific broken down worlds into these specific types of magic and gods and deities. It's just fascinating to me, and I love to see it. My next buzzword would be an alive or a spooky forest. I love it when we have a setting or a part of the world that is a forest or is just some kind of nature element that is spooky, alive. interacting with our characters, influencing our characters, you know, something about it is an important part of the plot. So things like this are Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which is a fantasy story that takes place, you know, kind of around a dark and spooky forest with a dragon in it, and I love that book so much, so dearly. I also would talk about The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This is a middle grade that we have a spooky forest that separates a village and a witch and more civilization, and sort of what goes on in that forest influences all of these areas very deeply, and kind of the things we explore there are so interesting. We also have The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater, one of my favorite series of all time. This is a series that has a forest that, you know, communicates with people, and, you know, the trees speak Latin is one of the taglines of that series, and it's such a fascinating world, and kind of the magics within it are so specific and very technical, and I love that. So kind of a double hit right there. We have Plain Bad Heroines, which is a little more, like, maybe not quite the ultimate example of this, but it has a spooky forest, if not an alive forest in it, as well as The Bear and the Nightingale, which is very much centered around gods of winter and spring, as well as, you know, chaos, and the forest is a big part of that. And then we also have things like Mooncakes, which is a graphic novel, and the forest spirits that are in that book, I want more details about that. I want more details about the relationship between the witches and the forest spirits, because we get such a little glimpse of it, and it's a standalone graphic novel that has not been expanded, and I just love the little glimpses we get of that in that story. Then a more like broad request or broad buzzword for me is when you see things that indicate that it's going to be a sci-fi and fantasy mashup, something where I have always been fascinated by a fantasy world that incorporates technology. I just love to see a world where, you know, it's not a medieval setting. We are like in a fantastical world, but then there is also some kind of technology, you know, incorporated, whether that's an urban fantasy or something that, you know, they figured out more technological advances alongside their magic. I just love those type of stories. So things like Iron Widow by Jiren Zhao, where, you know, there's fantastical elements as well as things that are scientific based and sci-fi based, and it's just like a combination of those things. It kind of crosses the line between whether you know if it's fantasy or sci-fi. A great example in my life of this is pretty much everything Ilana Andrews writes. That pair of writers just really does this so well, in my opinion. The Kate Daniels series is literally a series where we go from having magic in the world to it disappearing and technology reigning, and then the magic, like, waves, as we call them in the series, come back and forth, and, you know, which one is dominant, technology or magic. And it's a fascinating series. I love to see that battle within the series and how the characters have to adapt to it. We also have Gideon the Ninth, where it's a sci-fi in that it is like space necromancers, as we talk about, it's lesbian space necromancers, but it's also got this element to it that might be magic and might not be, and it's just fascinating. I love this type of thing. Dune was a good example of this too, where it feels sci-fi because we are on a foreign planet, but then there's also a lot of like unexplained scientific elements that feel almost like magic. And that's exactly what they say in the Innkeeper series, that like the technology, this is by Ilana Andrews, the technology is so far advanced in that series that it seems like magic to humans. And I just love that part of that story. We also have When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, which is a story about the women who disappeared during the Great Dragoning in the 1960s, which is basically when women turned into dragons and left, and no one knows what happened to them. And this book explores what happened and what happened in the aftermath of them leaving, both to their families and friends as well as other people in the community. It's a wonderful book. I love it so much, and it is a fascinating look at this sort of fantastical thing happening, but then also like the what if of what would happen if women just disappeared. And it's interesting, and they also try to be scientific and like methodical about this unexplained event, and it's fascinating. Then we have books about shifters. I am not a vampire girly, I am a shifter girly. So things like the Psy Changeling series by Nalani Singh, that is also really interesting, like fantastical / sci-fi adventure. There's like people with psychic powers, and there's also shifters in that world. So Nalani Singh has my heart with that series. It's so good. I need to get back to that series. And then we have Soulless by Gail Carriger. There is vampires in that world, but I feel like we end up seeing a lot more of the shifter dynamics than we do the vampire ones throughout that series, just based on what Alexia does, and it's just really interesting. We still see the vampires, but I feel like it just ends up being a little more shifter focused since she is kind of involved with the shifters. And then there's things like the Magic Bites series, which has shifters and vampires, and they're both interesting, but I'm a shifter girly. I prefer to read those stories. So those are, I'm always looking for more of them, like really well written ones that are interesting and don't always have to do necessarily with werewolves. I like shifters. I like seeing, like in the Kate Daniels series, I mentioned that I like specific magics. We have were-jackals, we have were-rats, we have were-coyotes, we have were-hyenas, we have were-whatevers, and like it is a fascinating world to explore in that series. So I'm a shifter girl. If you have shifter suggestions, hit me up. My next one is sort of a weird conglomeration. It is dual / multi POV stories, but they're also sort of like dual timeline stories or dual perspective stories, we'll say, because I don't want to, like, I just love to be all over the place in a story. Not too much. Like, I don't need to be in everyone's head. I want these point of views to be purposeful. I want them to be productive. I prefer a dual POV romance over a single POV, but these are more multi-perspective, different, looking at the same problem from a different lens, looking at a political problem from a different lens type books. So They Never Learn is a thriller, and we have 2 points of view in here, and following this story was fascinating. I loved this. Then we also have The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Haro. This follows 3 sisters, and we see each of their perspectives and kind of where they're coming at from all of these different kind of points of view on a problem and how they want to approach it, and also how they need to approach it based on their own like desires and backgrounds. Then we have God Killer again by Hannah Canner, which we are following a few points of view characters throughout the book and what's going on with them and what their motivations are, as well as kind of how they're seeing this problem with the gods and everything. So I love that book too. And then Plain Bad Heroines is kind of the same thing, that we have a few different timelines, we have a few different points of view. We're looking at, you know, what really happened versus what we think happened in the future, and that one really plays with like your perspective of the events and who got what right. And I love that in a story, in a book, and kind of getting who can we trust is always an interesting question in a book, and I love getting multiple points of view on it so that you think you might know what's going on, but then what's really happening. My next buzzword is a secret society, a cult, a mysterious group, even a friend group that's kind of sketchy, like in If We Were Villains by ML Rio. I loved this book earlier this year. Had a fantastic time with it, found the group of friends fascinating. It's not necessarily like a secret society book or anything like that, but it's just interesting to see like this friend group with a secret. So that's another interesting take on this. I also read Ninth House earlier this year. At the same time, I read If We Were Villains and loved it. This one was so fascinating. Secret societies galore in this one. Then we have The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, which is also a like secret societies, mysterious groups book. And I loved that. That really solidified this for me when I read these 3 books this year, that I love that element in a book, and it's something I've newly discovered. I'm looking for recommendations for and just can't wait to read more of. That one is so exciting because it's new, but I also discovered this in an Instagram post, and if I can remember or find the creator, I will like have it linked down below. But I think it might have been the Paper Fury Instagram account. I could be wrong, but this is a trope of like what's going on with my roommate, and when I was watching that like Instagram post like fly by, I was like, this is something I like, because it was the Raven Boys, it was If We Were Villains, and there was one more that I was like, oh, I'm interested in that book, and I can't remember. So that's a developing one. Like, it's like, what's going on with my roommate, what's mysterious about my roommate, and that's a good one, and I am excited to explore that more because I saw that and I was like, yes, I want that. Then the last one I have here is fantasy with a romantic plot line, like a strong romantic plot line, but not necessarily fanro or romantasy. I do love, I'll give you some examples here, but I do love a fantasy where we're not necessarily taking the fantasy super seriously. Like, there is fantasy stuff going on, it is important, we're following that plot, but then there's also like a pretty strong romance going on in the background. So something like A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen, where like we are focused on our main character's problems, you know, we're focused on her survival and focused on her finding out what's going on with her like lineage and stuff, but then there's also this like simmering romance underneath, and kind of something that is distracting the main characters, or is, you know, kind of pulling the attention away from the fantasy every once in a while, but it's not necessarily something that is boiling all the time. And this is similar to the Kill the Queen series by Jennifer Eastep. I love that series so much. The romance plotline really peaks in book 2 of the trilogy, but throughout the series, like, it is an important part of that plot overall. But we're mostly focused on Evie and her rise to being queen and what happens after that. But the romance plotline is still pretty strong. There's also Fireborn by Rosario Munda. I think I'll have it here. And that one is so interesting because I feel like in the first book that I've read, I can't speak for all the books, I've only read the first book, but you know, we have this really intense political situation going on, but we also have this situation that we're trying to figure out if these young people are romantically interested in one another, and you know, sort of the tension that goes along with that in YA. I'm not trying to spoil anything here, I'm just saying, like, you kind of feel that tension from the very beginning that these two main characters are really close, and where is it going to go from here? But there is so much other stuff going on that's very much like not the main plot, but it's also something that pops up every once in a while and is influencing decisions at some points, if not all points. So I like that. And then we also have the Innkeeper Chronicles by Alana Andrews that I mentioned earlier. This is one that the romance is important and essential to the plot, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on, and it's something that happens alongside the other plots. I don't want to say never. Often I don't want the romance plotline to like dominate the fantasy. I'm primarily a fantasy reader. I want the fantasy part to be the focus, but I want a believable, entertaining, strong, and important like romance plotline too. I want the romance, so often I want the romance to be something that's like supporting the main character, something that they're finding a partner that will support them and help them figure out this fantasy thing without it being their sole focus, and that's just me. That's what I'm looking for. But that is it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any thoughts or feelings, especially if you have recommendations and you want to comment them down below, please let me know. While you're down there, you can like and subscribe as well. We are getting kind of close to 1,000 subscribers around here, so if you are interested in hanging around and hanging out for next time, maybe seeing what comes out of this video, what recs I get from there, you can subscribe. But if you aren't feeling chatty, you can leave me a B for Buzzwords down below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much in advance for any suggestions or recommendations you have, and I can't wait to see you next time. Bye!